Let's get one thing right. This is not your standard fight. This is the highest level of combat sports we have ever seen. This is the pinnacle, pound for pound number 1 versus pound for pound number 2, 11 fight win streak versus 22 fight win streak on the line. This is the rarest fight in MMA history, and we are lucky to have it this weekend. There are so many nuances to this fight. I could speak on it all day. Islam going to Australia, his first title defense, Khabib not being in the corner, Volk moving up. There are a million things. However, I've broken it into 4 topics of conversation that we can have a look at. The first one's going to be Islam's wrestling, Islam's striking, Volk's movement, and Volk's size. So, before we do anything else, hit the subscribe button, share it with a friend if you enjoy the content, and let's jump into the breakdown. A lot has been made about the disadvantages of Volk's size. However, I think we can actually spin the conversation and have a look at how his size and his stature may be advantageous against someone like Islam. Initially, the first thing which springs to mind is the takedowns. Now, Islam isn't a traditional single leg to double leg kind of fighter. He's not going to blast a double leg from the middle of the octagon. He may if he's frustrated. But if he does, it's going to be very difficult to get to the hips of Alex, and it's going to be very difficult to actually disrupt that base where he has such a good low center of gravity. So I imagine he's probably going to go for the upper body trips, the clinches, and work on the inside. And I think this is where the rugby background really translates over. Now, if you've heard anything about Volkanovski, you'll know he used to play rugby, and he used to play at 220 pounds. And the reason why this is important is to know that his position in rugby was with the behemoths on the field. It was the front row. And if you aren't familiar, these are the 6 foot, 220 pound plus players on the field, which he has to come up against and he has to ruck against as well. So there's a lot of transitional skills there. But the main thing which I think he takes over from rugby, which he does fantastically, is builds frames. Now in rugby, when you're carrying the ball, you have it in one hand and you're building frames with the other. You can hand people off, you can build frames with your arms just to stop people. And it's a constant upper body battle whenever you're playing. So especially when you're running with the ball, like you can see in the clip of him when he's playing for his hometown, that's a massive advantage. And the second thing as well, which is very, very transitional, are the rucks. Now, if you watch a rugby union game, you'll see there's a lot of rucks and breakdowns. And why that's important is because the structure that you need in the rucks is very low central gravity, a straight back, you get over your own player, and then you're nice and low so you can fend off anyone in front of you. Now, the way that carries over to mixed martial arts, it gets a really good low base when he's hanging over someone, and then he can let the ground and pound go. Now, I don't foresee that happening as much in this fight, but it's definitely where he gets a lot of his abilities to. So it's going to be hard to get to the legs. He builds good frames, and he's got that very physical upper body strength. And the last thing, when we have a look at his stature that I think is going to serve him quite well, is one of Volk's best attributes is his overhand right. Now, I wouldn't insult him by saying it's a wrestler's overhand right, but that's where it started, and now it's polished to become one of the best right hands in the world and in the history of mixed martial arts combat when we have a look at his striking. And why that lines up so nicely is because he's a lot shorter than Islam. That lines that right hand perfectly to the chin if he can just slip out the way of that jab and let it rip from the outside, like we saw against Max Holloway when he cut his entire face open. So I wouldn't be surprised if we saw him slip out the way of a shot just off centre line and land that big right hand with the perfect trajectory to his chin. And don't forget, Volk actually has the reach advantage here, and that comes down from the pure width of his back. Point number 2, Islam's wrestling. Now, the Dagestan wrestling has always got that allure because it always seems to defeat anyone in front of it. And the game will continuously be name the person who can beat that style. But what happens? They beat the next person, and they beat the next person, and they beat the next person, and the conversation never finishes. But for me personally, as a fan, this will answer the question, because if anyone in the world can do it right now, it's Alexander Volkanovski. So this is really going to show how good is Makhachev's grappling. And we know the level that it is, but now we're against someone that has fantastic strength, fantastic getting up ability, and the grit and determination to weather any storm. So this is really going to answer a lot of questions. Now, as I mentioned before, we don't typically see the double legs from the middle of the octagon like some wrestlers with Islam Makhachev. We do see a lot of clinching. And he mentioned before that this is going to be the game plan going into it. I think we're going to see a lot of Muay Thai clinches, a lot of plum clinches, and a lot of knees from there. he doesn't have the threat of the takedown to go against him, or at least he isn't concerned with that. So that gives him great freedom when he's in the pocket to let those knees go, let the elbows go, and let those short attacks go. Now, what that does is it allows him to close the distance with Volk. So now he's at a lot less danger, and now we can start working his inside game. And what he does so well is gets a grip of that upper body, and just with pure strength, he'll drag and trip his opponent down to the mat. And the thing that stands out with Islam that he does so well, he has a sixth sense of knowing where the person's going to land. Years and decades of spending time on the mats, he knows where the body's going to fall and what position he needs to consort himself into. And this is a major skill, because if I can see them getting locked up against the cage and a body lock and he drags him down to the ground and he falls in an advantageous position like we saw against Charles Oliveira, that's going to be very problematic for Volk, because no matter his defense, no matter his grit, if he's locked into that perfect position, that squeezing the strength of Islam, that could be a very short night. So I'm interested to see how it plays out, but I imagine the wrestling is going to be in very close quarters, unless he starts getting flustered on his feet and he starts taking panic shots because his brain's being fried by all the movements and feints and tricks in front of him with Volkanovski. Number 3 is Islam's striking. So you may have heard before that is very underrated, and he does have very good striking. This is true. And I think this is because we always refer him to Khabib, we always refer him to other Dagestanis, and traditionally the idea is they can't strike. Islam can. Islam has good striking, he has good fundamentals, he knows how to keep himself safe, he knows how to use his shots to set up his wrestling and not do much more. And that's a very important and fundamental skill, especially when you're going up against someone like Volk. Things he does very well, like we mentioned before, in the clinch he works very well with his knees, but from longer range he has nice body kicks, he goes high with it, and it's really well disguised, so you don't know if he's going low, middle or high because of the flexibility and the way he throws his kicks. They have no fat on them, they have no wind up, and it's hard to actually read them. So that's going to be a good long range weapon against someone like Volk especially. And then bolting on top of that, we've seen things like extended hooks and big overhands into single legs as well, which is where his strengths are. And I saw Dan Hardy mention on a BT breakdown how Islam does such a great job of using all his weapons. So most noticeably in his last fight we saw against Charles Oliveira, he used the ridge hand punch where he landed that hook on the chin. Now, why that's important is because it just adds an extra couple of inches to your reach, because you can fully extend the arm out now. Instead of having a punch here, you can fully extend the arm and reach a target further out of distance. So this could be problematic for Volk. If he gets caught in that range where he's a little bit out, where he can't get in quick enough, and Islam lands his shots. Now, we've seen the power of Islam. We've seen how hard he can hit, and we've seen him with knockouts. So if he can get a flash knockdown of Volk, which we've seen before against Max, we've seen before against Ortega, I don't think he was hurt. I don't think he was rocked, but he was knocked to the ground. And Islam, if he gets that opportunity, will be bang, straight inside control, and it's going to be difficult to work from there for Volk. So we have to be wary of Islam's striking. However, I preface that with saying there are levels to this game, and Alex Volkanovski is not a level of striker he has ever stood in front of before. Charles Oliveira, fantastic striker. However, you know what he's going to do. He's going to march you down in a straight line, throw long shots with knees and kicks and big punches and hooks, and he's going to march you down. He's not going to cut angles. He's not going to set his shots up, and he's going to go for broke. That's not going to be the case with Volk, and we'll come on to that in a second. Which brings us on to number 4, Volk's striking. This is going to be a huge factor in this fight, and if Volk gets his hand raised, which I believe he can, his striking is going to be a large part of that, because as I mentioned, it's at a level that Islam has never faced before. If you want to talk about it as a language, this is a language Islam has never spoke, because the well-versed nature of Alex and the tricks that he has in the toolbox is unlike really anyone in MMA at the moment. The way he can fight going forwards, backwards, his feints, his hand fighting, the traps that he leads you into, his lateral movement, it's all there, and it's all there so dialed in and very calculated. He's always clear, he's always methodical, and he's always setting up and reading the next attack. And this is what makes him so dangerous. The lateral movement that I just mentioned there is going to be pivotal in this fight, because when he's moving laterally, your feet are not set. So if your feet are not set in one position, it's going to be a lot harder for someone like a wrestler to take you down. So lateral movement's going to be very, very important. And also the ability to go into range and slide out of range. And by doing so, and by setting traps, I believe that he may be able to frustrate Islam at times and get him crashing in at a time when he's expecting it and walking him onto a big shot, whether that's a right hand, whether that's an uppercut on his way in. I can see him doing that. He lets his big shots go and then he exits. And this is something that's going to be very important with Volk when he's on the feet, and he spoke about it in his interviews, capitalizing on the feet. His windows of opportunity are going to be a lot smaller in this fight than his previous 4 or 5 fights. So he has to capitalize. So I think we're going to see the crispest striking we've ever seen. I think we're going to see him hit harder than we've ever seen. And I think he's going to look faster than we've ever seen, which is a quite terrifying prospect. The fascination that I have with this fight is when anyone comes up against Islam, they always have that seed of doubt in their head of how they're going to execute their own game plan because they're worried about getting taken down. Now, Alex has come out on record and said, I'm not scared of that. I've embraced that. I know it potentially can happen, and I'm going to execute my own game plan, which is a massive win already, to be quite honest. That is a massive part of the battle, because if he can go in with that mindset and he can implement his own game, I can see Islam getting very frustrated and his brain is just frying and short wiring because there's so many feints, there's so many traps, and he hasn't really seen this before. And maybe he's taken him down once or he's taken him down twice and he's popped back to his feet and now he's letting his hands go and he's just sliding out of range, and then he's just sliding into range and letting his shots go, and then he's back out. And he's hard to find, he's hard to track down, he's hard to corner, and you can't find him in the octagon, and all of a sudden it's the 4th round and he's 2-3 rounds down. This is a very likely scenario. However, to conclude, this is, like I said, the pinnacle of the sport, and as fans we are truly, truly grateful to get this, and as a fan of the sport I feel blessed and honoured to get this. Now so I'll leave it on this final point. We've mentioned all the things that come into play, but there's one last thing that really interests me: the camps. We know that Islam Makhachev has one of the best camps and one of the most intriguing camps in the world. His head coach, Xavier Mendez, is one of the best in the game and one of the smartest minds. On the flip side, we have Freestyle MMA and we have Craig Jones and the Hickman brothers and Joe Lopez that Volk's been working intensely with this entire camp. Now, why that intrigues me is because we have such a great grappler like Craig Jones, and not only has he tried to prepare Volk for what Islam can throw at him, but also actually break down the Dagestani system, what they're so good at, and look to reverse engineer their abilities. So they had a look at the pins. That's where the Dagestanis are so good, with their pins and keeping you on the ground with that strength and just sheer force of getting you there and not allowing you to move. So they spoke about reverse engineering that and how they can work around it. Now, it's going to be seriously difficult to implement all that in a matter of weeks against someone that's been doing it their whole life. But if anyone can do it, it's Alexander Volkanovski. Now, certainly Islam has a brilliant chance in this fight, but I think Volk's going to do it. I think the striking is going to be too much. I think the hips are going to be too strong. And I think we're really going to be shown that there is one elite mixed martial artist on this planet that is better than anybody else pound for pound, that has the mentality, the skill, and every attribute in the book to go with it. And he's going to shock the world. And new 2-time champion, the great Alexander Volkanovski. Let me know what you think in the comments. And as always, keep it casual.